Mr. Speaker, sir, I support Budget 2025 that is a budget for all Singaporeans and a budget for the future. Since last week, after PM has delivered the budget speech, I've heard some Singaporeans comment that it is more of the same, distributing more vouchers, investing in research and development, and upskilling our workforce. In some ways, I beg to differ. I think Member Liang Wenghua has laid out in detail earlier measures and efforts which are extensive in this current budget, and not to forget past budgets, which are still ongoing, helping our residents and helping Singaporeans. But more of the same is not a bad thing. It means our government is not going to take short-term and populist stances just for special events happening this year. More importantly, it means our approach is working and achieving its aims. Income inequality is at its lowest since 2000, and we achieved better than expected economic growth of 4.4% last year. But one thing that is clear is that the global environment is different and fast-changing. Trump 2.0 has just kicked off, and many asset managers and funds are already predicting more volatility and turbulence ahead. The first area, Mr. Speaker, I would like to speak on is attracting investments and good jobs to Singapore. This is key to a small and resource-light country that we are. Even as we debated our unexpectedly high corporate income tax collections on several occasions last year, and even, I'm sure this year, some members will raise this, there's little disagreement that we cannot take it for granted that corporates will always choose to stay in Singapore and not move somewhere else. As global supply chains shift in the wake of the pandemic and geopolitical tensions, we are also seeing deglobalization as countries seek to secure the resources and protect domestic jobs. With that backdrop, countries are competing more aggressively to attract investments and multinational companies to set up operations and bases. We cannot afford to lose ground. According to the EDB's year in review of 2024 statistics on commitments to invest into Singapore, we are seeing falls across the projected contribution of value added per annum, the number of jobs expected to be created, and total business expenditure per annum. While Amazon Web Services and pharma giant AstraZeneca have announced major investment commitments into Singapore, other MNCs like Dyson, Samsung, Electronic Shine, and Electrolux have either scaled down or shut down Singapore operations. Given the evolving changes in the global economic, business, and political environment, the question I have is whether we have performed an in-depth study of the impact of specific factors on a company's decision to reduce or completely remove its presence in Singapore. And this falls back to the volatility of corporate tax revenue going forward as well. So general points are well known and often repeated that Singapore cannot afford to compete on costs, that we need to focus on value add, and that our attractiveness lies in our political stability and the rule of law. But from industry to industry, or company to company, do we have the mechanisms to study the particular factors that's causing company to offshore its functions from Singapore to another country? The risk is always there. Think of it as an exit interview for a departing employee. We should take the chance to learn what didn't go well and what can do better, and what we can do better, and whether there will be further opportunities to collaborate again in the future. Second, besides doing reflections after the fact, we should also think forward and rationalize our existing investment attraction toolkit. I had raised this when we debated the Economic Expansion Incentives Bill in November 2024. Minister of State, Mr. Alvin Tan, responded that both MTI and MOF have been continuously refreshing our incentive toolkits to ensure relevance and competitiveness, and updating legislations under their purview as required. On top of incrementally adding, tweaking, and removing specific incentive schemes, is it time for a holistic rethink of our investment attraction toolkit and how they fit together to achieve our strategic objectives, and which ministry should take the lead in such an effort? This is all the more the case when we have recently passed relevant measures that are based on the OECD's base erosion and profit shifting BEPS 2.0 rules. So in light of President Donald Trump's executive order on 20th January 2025, withdrawing the US from the BEPS 2.0 consensus, how will Singapore respond? So in view of our recent moves to implement BEPS 2.0, the 50% corporate income tax rebate announced by PM is a positive surprise. Nonetheless, would such rebates be BEPS 2.0 compliant? If not, I would have thought that corporates in Singapore should be conditioned to accept and understand that large corporate tax breaks are a thing of the past. Third, I was hoping to see plans to accelerate novel growth pillars in Budget 2025, such as cybersecurity or AI, and possibly this might be discussed in COS. But I use these examples because I believe they are horizontals which have the potential to shake up different industries with their development and deployment. What concrete programs or schemes are we going to push out to further 15 actions and 10 enablers in our National AI Strategy 2.0? What is the government's assessment of our business uptake of AI presently, especially our small and medium enterprises? And whether the government can play a greater role in facilitating our Singaporean businesses' AI transformation, as I believe it will be a massive game changer in the years ahead. I'm sure PM can't mention all that in his budget speech, and I look forward to the COS from the different ministries on this. Fourth, the continued emphasis on worker upskilling and reskilling will certainly boost our attractiveness as a hub to do business. There are some concerns in this House whether the OECD's program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, or PIAAC, flagged a significant decline in the literacy after the age of 35 from the Singapore citizens and PRs who were surveyed. It is a good idea to redesign the SkillsFuture Enterprise Credit to operate like an online wallet, so companies can use the credits to immediately offset staff training costs rather than do so on a reimbursement basis. While not exactly similar, I think of this like the Live SG credits, which can now be used to pay now to shops and vendors directly. Is there scope to do something similar to make it even easier for individual Singaporeans to utilize their SkillsFuture credits? In response to a PQ last month, Minister Chun Seng shared that only about 26% of eligible Singaporeans have used their one-off SkillsFuture credit top-up of 500, even though the top-up was given in 2020 and expires by the end of this year. Have any surveys been done to study why Singaporeans are not utilizing these training benefits which the government has given to them? Mr. Speaker, my second part of my speech is on helping families with dependents, such as elderly parents, for example. And I would like to thank PM and MOF for the budget measures to help families in general, but in particular, families, middle-income families with dependents, such as elderly parents. Families are building blocks of our society, as well as the individual's closest support net. Based on the Department of Statistics 2024 data, at least 51.7% of resident households comprises children staying together with their parents or parent. This does not include other household living arrangements, such as a divorcee, living with elderly parents only. When I was preparing this speech, it was also difficult to find the number of households with other dependents, such as persons with special needs. Based on IRS's data on dependent reliefs claim, how many resident households have dependents such as elderly parents, minor children, and persons with special needs? These are important because if there are a significant number of families with these dependents, the increasing need for financial help to them might be important. As they do their best to support their family members, it is only right that we provide them with whatever support that we can. At the budget dialogue I attended last year, interestingly, there were a number of questions and feedback requesting for help for working adult children taking care of their elderly parents, and whether more help can be done to help them. The sandwich class, you may say middle class, sandwich class, who are also living with their parents. So Budget 2025 provides support for families and even for vulnerable families, and I'm very thankful for that. I share the NPTD and Minister Indrani's hope that the large family scheme will encourage more Singaporeans to have 3 or more children and bring our TFR up from 0.97. My 3 children are way older than 6 years old now, so, but even without enjoying the large family scheme benefits, the joy and fulfillment brought by my kids to my life have been immeasurable and irreplaceable. But I have also heard from some parents with young kids who have expressed some disappointment because they were expecting more help. While I would explain that the government cannot cover all child-raising expenses and that there are more affordable children's programs compared to others, I do see their point in the message that we are sending across. Do we risk looking out of touch for thinking that amounts newly offered will be sufficient to move the needle? Or are we interested in getting only the married couples who would like but cannot afford to have a third child to do so? Ultimately, as this House has heard in a motion filed by fellow PAP colleagues, Ms. Haniso and Mr. Zul Karnain, promoting parenthood is a multifaceted endeavour. We should therefore work continuously to address the various issues that are currently discouraging our people from having children or from having more children. But besides financial support, perhaps one area that the government can facilitate more is in creating a family-friendly environment at work. And like I mentioned earlier, the feedback from the budget last year, could we perhaps look at increasing parental leave and family care leave for working adult caregivers? As our baby boomers age and health issues emerge, working children and caregivers would need more family care leave to send their elderly parents for medical visits, health checkups, and emergency health needs. So I understand that policies for additional parental leave to care for children that are not newly born can vary greatly from company to company. But such parental leave will not only allow for working parents to bring their children to the doctors when they are sick, but it can also provide time for working parents to attend at preschool events and celebrations, or just to spend meaningful time with their children or parents during official school holidays and for emergency needs, for example. Another area which will alleviate the burden on working caregivers is flexible work arrangements. So since tripartite guidelines on flexible work arrangement requests were launched in April 2024, how many complaints has the MOM received regarding employers who are not complying with the guidelines? What is the next step for us to strengthen the regime and set some standards on flexi-time, flexi-load or flexi-place arrangements that employers must offer? Mr. Speaker, my third area would be to touch on retirement adequacy, and I've raised this for the past 4 budget speeches that I've highlighted. It is the third consecutive budget debate in which I focus on this issue, given the extraordinary inflationary environment in recent years, which has diluted Singapore's nest eggs, and I've been hearing concerns. So, Mr. Speaker, I will do this in Malay and not English. So, Mr. Speaker, in Malay, please. Dengan populasi yang semakin menua, adalah penting bahawa pekerja kita hari ini dapat menjaga diri mereka sendiri apabila mereka akhirnya bersara. Kita cuba mencapai matlamat ini melalui sistem CPF yang diiktiraf sebagai salah satu sistem pension terbaik di dunia. Dalam beberapa tahun kebelakangan ini, semakin banyak kebimbangan sama ada simpanan persaraan kita mencukupi. Pandemik dan isu global lain menyebabkan kos harian kita terus meningkat. Mi soto yang berharga RM2.50 5 tahun lalu, kini berharga $4. Oleh itu, kita mesti melindungi diri daripada tekanan inflasi yang akan datang. Bajet tahun lepas mengandungi beberapa langkah untuk meningkatkan simpanan CPF warga emas kita. Kini kami mempertingkatkan skim simpanan persaraan sepadan MRSS atau Match Retirement Saving Scheme untuk rakyat Singapura berumur 50 tahun ke atas. Pemerintah juga menyediakan bonus melalui pakej majulah. Sejauh manakah keberkesanan langkah-langkah ini dalam memastikan keperluan jangka panjang warga emas kita terjaga? Apakah kriteria digunakan untuk menilai tahap kecukupan persaraan setiap warga emas dan masyarakat secara keseluruhan? Sebagai contoh, mungkin berguna untuk mengetahui sama ada kadar penggunaan MRSS telah meningkat dan sama ada lebih banyak keluarga memanfaatkan sokongan pemerintah dolar untuk dolar ini. Sebaliknya, bajet 2025 nampaknya tidak mengumumkan sebarang langkah khusus untuk meningkatkan CPF atau dana persaraan warga emas. Tetapi saya juga menunggu mungkin perbincangan sewaktu COS di Kementerian MOM umpamanya. Memandangkan prospek inflasi jangka panjang dan hakikat bahawa kadar faedah pasaran terus melebihi 2%, bagaimana kita boleh mempertingkatkan pelan meningkat CPF Life Escalating Plan yang meningkatkan bayaran sebanyak 2% setiap tahun. Pada masa yang sama, kita mesti terus menggalakkan dan memudahkan warga emas untuk terus bekerja lebih lama. Ini memerlukan perubahan minda. Daripada menantikan persaraan pada usia 55 tahun, rakyat Singapura perlu melihat nilai untuk kekal aktif dan menjadi ahli masyarakat yang menyumbang. Memandangkan jangka hayat yang semakin panjang, iaitu 80.7 tahun bagi lelaki dan 85.2 bagi wanita. Jadi kredit pekerjaan warga emas dan peningkatan kadar caruman CPF untuk pekerja senior akan membantu. Tapi seperti yang saya cadangkan semasa perbahasan rang undang-undang keadilan tempat kerja bulan lepas, kita mesti melangkaui diskriminasi umur dan menyediakan sebab positif kepada majikan untuk menggaji warga emas. Apakah yang sedang dilakukan dalam hal ini sama ada melalui penglibatan majikan atau cara lain? Bolehkah saya juga bertanya sama ada terdapat garis masa yang konkret untuk kumpulan kerja tripartite mengenai pekerjaan wajib warga emas yang dinyatakan dalam lampiran D3 ucapan bajet bahawa MOM akan mengadakannya akhir tahun ini? Bilakah kumpulan kerja ini dijangka mengemukakan cadangan mereka dan di bilakah rundingan awam akan diadakan? Adakah terdapat tempoh masa umum di mana kita boleh mengharapkan kemajuan sedemikian? Mr. Speaker, in English, please. So I mentioned earlier about the retirement adequacy in Malay, but I think it's a very important topic for Singaporeans at large going forward, especially with the rising costs and also the longer age that we might achieve because of health improvements. One final point I just want to highlight is on the social equity and social mobility. to address social equity and social mobility, and on the cost of living support in budget 2025. I've received feedback asking why this is being given to all Singaporeans and not just the less well-to-do like in previous budgets. And I think earlier members mentioned in the first few earlier speeches, including LO. The suggestion seems to be that we are taking a step backward in making Singapore a more equal society. But we mustn't forget that costs are rising for everyone, not just lower income groups. Middle income households also need help. Ultimately, it is not a zero-sum game. It's not true that every dollar that we take from upper or middle income households would otherwise have automatically gone to a lower income household. That is too simplistic. We also shouldn't ignore all other programs that are aimed at helping lower income groups. Just in budget 2025 alone, there is the tiered USAVE utility support as well as the progressive wage credit scheme that we are enhancing. There's also ComCare, for which I thank PM for raising the financial assistance amounts from April 2025. Anyone who has been involved in constituency or community work would know the important role that ComCare plays in taking care of those in need around us. So may I ask, how often are the financial assistance amounts reviewed, and how is the quantum of the upcoming increase determined? For ex-offenders, another area that PM mentioned in his speech, who is another group of Singaporeans that Budget 2025 seeks to uplift, the extension of the uplifting employment credit to end 2028 is a welcome announcement. I thank PM for that and look forward to hearing more about our plans at MOMCOS. How much has the uplifting employment credit been tapped on since it has been introduced in Budget 2023? Besides tracking the number of ex-offenders who have benefited from the uplifting employment credit, do we also track how long each individual manages to stay in employment? In assessing the success of the scheme, we should also consider how many of these individuals manage to progress in their employment, securing higher roles and even better jobs. What else can we do to help ex-offenders secure good and suitable jobs beyond the Yellow Ribbon Project's employment assistance? And since I'm on the topic of leaving no one behind, there's one other group who is not mentioned as often, that is Singaporeans working and living abroad. They are Singaporeans as much as you and me. And this year being election year, essentially, many of them will travel distances and even across states to exercise their citizens' right to vote. Whereas many of us here will just need to cross the road from our home to a nearby school or HDB block to do so. But because they might not have an address in Singapore, they may not be able to get many of the vouchers, rebates, and other benefits that are given to Singaporeans in Budget 2025. One avenue where we can include them is to extend the Skills Future Job Seeker Support Scheme to Singaporeans working overseas. A resident has recently informed me that Workforce Singapore, WSG, had told him that overseas Singaporeans will not be eligible for monetary help under the Skills Future Job Seeker Support Scheme because one of the requirements is that you had to be previously employed in Singapore for at least 6 of the past 12 months. If we would like more younger Singaporeans to dare to venture abroad to build Singapore's competitiveness in the longer term, we should extend the Skills Future Job Seeker Support to cover the more than 200,000 overseas Singaporeans. This will provide them with the protection we think Singaporeans deserve in the event of overseas layoffs. My final point, Mr. Speaker, before I end, is on the point of inflation and the cost of living, and I've highlighted this in the same part, social equity and being equitable across all groups. Earlier members have highlighted, and I think many those outside this chamber have also raised the point about inflation and the cost of living. And I think some members here today have highlighted that as well, about inflation being turbocharged due to GST, and the question is whether that has actually led to raise concerns about whether that we continue to have an impact on the cost of living. I do note that point. The cost of living is a major concern.
You have a minute left. Just
it's a major concern, but I think GST, inflation being impacted by GST being turbocharged may not be a fair point in general, because inflation went up in Singapore like all other countries due to other things like war and supply chain disruptions, and inflation at its peak was not as high in Singapore as compared to many other countries in the region or even globally. And in fact, in a PQ on 6 February 2024, which Mr. Liang Eng Hua asked, the response highlighted that GST rate increase is estimated to contribute only slightly less than 1 percentage point to core inflation. And there are other factors such as high electricity and gas tariffs, which increase in oil prices as well as production costs. So I just want to highlight that point in general about the impact of GST on inflation, but there's other factors beyond GST, and GST's impact is quite slight. So, Mr. Speaker, to end off, the world has become more uncertain. It looks to continue down that path. Geopolitical tensions continue to be unresolved. Global supply chains are shifting. Countries seek to protect their supply chain resilience as well as their domestic economy and priorities. But despite all that uncertainty, Budget 2025 demonstrates consistency. Consistency with past budgets to continue the good work we have done to bring an unexpected level of growth amidst our lowest level of income inequality since the turn of the century. Consistency with our ideals as identified in the Forward Singapore exercise to help involuntarily unemployed job seekers bounce back stronger, supporting families and seniors, empowering and uplifting those in need, and consistency in our government philosophy that the long-term interests of Singaporeans must remain the key priority, regardless of how the upcoming general election will turn out. And that is why I support Budget 2025, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.